Impact Teams Radio. Welcome to Impact Teams Radio, the show where we explore what it takes to be a leader of the leaders in corporate America. Get ready to be inspired and discover proven tips for going from average to exceptional. Now, here's your host and guide, Tony Sherman.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Impact Teams Radio. This is Tony Sherman, Implementation Rabbi at Impact Teams, your host and guide. And today we've got Sandy Sears with us, who's going to take us through her experience in becoming the leader that she is today. So welcome, Sandy.
Thank you, Tony. It's an honor and a pleasure to be on your show.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And we have a friend in common who put us together, Jeff Rock. How did you first get to know about Jeff? How did you first meet? Because he says you're his prize hire in his whole career. And I just wanted to unpack that one just a little bit.
Well, Jeff, in fact, did hire me, and that is how we got to know each other. And we have been fast friends and been in a mentor-mentee relationship ever since. He's one of my dearest friends and someone whose instinct I trust implicitly.
He does come across very quickly as somebody who is insightful and has a good, like you said, instinct, intuition, doesn't he?
Yes. I admire him very much.
Okay, so Sandy, let me step back and just take a minute or two and introduce yourself to our listeners so they get to know a little bit more about you.
Okay. I have a fairly eclectic background. I think I'm one of those people who still doesn't know what I want to do when I grow up, which I actually think makes life exciting.
Oh, absolutely. No, I'm still there. And like you said, therefore every day is a new day and it's interesting.
That's correct. I've been a consultant, I've been a project manager, I've been a business lead, I've been a business owner, I've been an adjunct professor, among other things.
So what about music and stuff like that? What do you like on that kind of area?
In music, I love all kinds of music. My son is a professional musician, and he's getting a PhD in music theory, so there's always been a lot of music in our house. I think some of my favorite tunes are classic rock, and, of course, anything that's been written by my son.
And you're not biased in any way whatsoever,
right? Not at all. I jotted down some interesting pieces of music that I've run into in the last few weeks, and I realized that I like music that does something that's a little different in terms of genre and so on. And I'll give you an example. Pink Floyd, which is a group I like very much, just released an album called The Endless River, and it's pretty much all instrumental, which is a change for them. But they do have a song called Hawkin' Talkin', which is a song over which Steve Hawking speaks the lyrics. It's fantastic.
That's amazing. I mean, what you said about Pink Floyd, in my mind, I love Pink Floyd, but I thought they were dead and buried, so I just learned something. Secondly, to get Steve Hawkins to be your vocalist is pretty, it shows how much influence they still have. Tony's concept of them being dead and buried is obviously totally wrong.
Exactly. They say that this will be their last album, but it is. It was just fascinating.
Well, with groups like that, I remember in, I'd say 83, 84, 85, somewhere around there, I went to the farewell tour, worldwide farewell tour of the Stones, and they're still touring.
Yes.
So it's like when they say it's the last album or the last tour, sometimes you just got to say,
Until the next one.
Until the next one, yeah. Until the next last one, yeah. You're right.
Another group that I ran into this week is something called Two Cellos, and the two is using the numeral. And they have an album called Intuition, and the two in the intuition is a two also. And they do rock cello. My son's a cellist, so I'm fascinated by this. And a couple of examples of songs on their album are AC/DC's Highway to Hell and Elton John's Candle in the Wind. So you can just imagine how unusual this is.
Actually, if you like them, go watch them perform on YouTube. They are phenomenal. Seriously, they're just a phenomenal group. In fact, they got their start in a music academy with an Elton John award. Elton John gave them a scholarship because he thought they were so talented.
Oh, that's awesome. And I have seen them on YouTube, and I think they go through a new bow every performance.
I have no idea, but I could well believe it, yes.
And then I also want to mention quickly my son, Dan Prindle. His album is Where You Land, and he has a wonderful song on that album called Water and Wine, which is a tribute to a daughter that they lost as a miscarriage. But it's a wonderful, wonderful tune.
Wow. Okay, wow. So has Dan published that album?
Yes, it is available on iTunes and I believe Amazon and probably CD Baby, although I can't swear for that.
Okay, well, I'll get one of my guys to dig out the link and we'll put it in the show notes.
Awesome, thank you.
Oh, pleasure. No, if you're telling us about good music, I'm going to probably find the link to the Pink Floyd one as well. Because I think if we had Dan's album up there and Pink Floyd's, that would be a win for the show.
I think so too.
So if we step back into leadership mode for a second, you know that the first episode of the show is always about your growth as a leader, your development, and we always like to start with a win. So if you look back over your career, and you can take it from any phase of your career, where did you have a win in your career that taught you about leadership?
I've had a couple of wins of which I'm very proud. One was enabling one of my teams, and I've actually done this more than once, but one sticks in my head. I enabled the team to do something they truly, truly thought they weren't capable of doing. And I believed that they were capable of doing what they were being asked to do, and they were successful. And one of the greatest compliments I think I've ever gotten as a leader was that I had gotten them to the point where they were able to do what they truly believed they couldn't do.
Wow. So let's unpack that a bit. I mean, without mentioning company names and so forth, what did you do? How did you realize that what you were asking was beyond their capacity, or they believed it was, and how did you solve that problem?
They were very clear with me that what I was asking them to do was something they had never done before, and they did not believe that they could do. And I think I did a number of things that helped enable them to work without being paralyzed by the fear of failure. One of the things I did was to ensure them that if they failed, it was on me, it wasn't on them, because I was truly asking them to stretch, and I understood and acknowledged that they weren't sure they could do the job successfully. And then I also was able to identify tools, techniques, and skills that they could use to be successful, and to make sure that they had all of those things available to them to ensure their success.
So could you give our listeners an idea of a tool technique that you used?
I am a big fan of providing textbooks, classes, guidance, mentors, colleagues to work with, examples of things that have been done that are similar to what a team is trying to do so that they can learn from all of that. I think I also provide a fairly nurturing environment, again, because I'm encouraging them and I'm asking them to do a hard thing knowing that they might fail and making sure they understand that that's okay. And then in terms of skills, that's, in some ways, programming skills, those sorts of things are easy to teach people, I think.
I agree with you. I mean, but having said that, were you running a project at the time, or was it more an operational lead role that you were taking?
This particular example wasn't a project.
Was a project, sorry. Oh, okay, good, because then that puts another challenge on there. So you must have had a lot of innate faith in your team if you thought that they could take something they didn't know, learn it, execute, and do it within the constraints of a project timeline, because normally project timelines, they at least try to be definitive. Mm-hmm. Budgets tend to be more definitive than timelines. But you have to juggle all of that to produce a deliverable while expecting your team to ramp up on new skills.
Yeah.
Was that nervous for you?
It really wasn't. Probably it should have been. Perhaps I was young and naive enough that I believed I could do things that perhaps I shouldn't have believed I could do.
Okay, that works, because it obviously did. So any other wins that you want to share with our listeners?
more recently, I was working in an open environment next to a team that was very, very dysfunctional. They weren't getting along. There was a huge amount of negative conflict. They weren't making progress on their goals. I went to the person who managed me as well as this other team, and I explained to her that they were in big trouble. And in the light of the paradigm that no good deed goes unpunished, I was tasked with getting to make the team successful. So I worked with them, and we did ask a couple of consultants who were working on the team and who were really enjoying disrupting to leave. But also I was able to work with the varying personalities on the team, and the personalities were very, very different, and get everyone to get aligned on a goal and to even get to the point where they respected each other and they worked very, very well together. And they ended up being my team for about 3 years.
Wow, that's a very, very good success story there. And I like the idea of, firing early, firing quickly, and then saying, okay, with the people that are left, different strokes for different folks, effectively.
Exactly. And I think that getting rid of the couple of consultants who were really making trouble, everyone was really making trouble, but getting rid of the consultants who were making trouble sent the message that I really wanted the team to be successful. I wanted them to work together, and I didn't want it to be a horrible experience.
Right. But it also sent the message that you could make a hard decision if you had to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which is also a good thing.
Yes. I was very clear with them, too, what the boundaries were for their behavior. And I did it respectfully, but I did it very, very clearly. And I would set up signals with folks who might have a behavior that they might not know they were falling into a particular negative attitude. And I would signal them when that was happening so that they would know that they had to stop.
Actually, I had that situation in reverse. I'd recently come to this country, and I was a hard charger and not very PC by American standards. And people really liked me. They liked my productivity. They liked how bright I was and all the things that I like to develop and show. But they said, but Tony, culturally, you're like a bull in a china shop. So I said, okay, here's the thing. I'm probably not going to change quick enough for you guys. So I need my manager and the guy who's my right-hand man in this team, and he was a guy. I said, I need you to just, when you sense that I'm not being cognizant of the fact that I could be treading on toes, being loud, blustery, whatever, you need to, and we came up with some code words. And I heard those code words very often at the beginning, and then less and less and less. And they are very useful. If you're willing to take the feedback, they're very useful. And I found personally that very quickly I managed to modify my behavior.
It's a wonderful technique, and I'm frankly surprised that people don't use it more often. But it does involve trust between the people who are using the technique. But it's hugely effective. I've had people use it for me as well.
Well, the thing is, I got told by my management that they needed me to be far more cognizant than I was. So I just went to my direct manager and said, we are going to lose if I don't change. So how can we work this out? And within 10 minutes, we came up with a strategy. And I said, okay, I'm going to get Pete to do this as well. And I went over to Pete and said, hey, Pete, I'm getting this kind of feedback. I need your help. And Pete was like, okay, what do you need me to do? And I gave him the same set of signals as my boss had and said, this is what you do. And between the two of them, I had like a safety net on either side. And it worked well.
Yes, I'm sure it did.
So given those were your successes, what did you learn about leadership out of those?
I'm sorry, I missed.
Okay, with those two successes, what leadership lessons would you pull out of those?
I think the leadership lesson I would pull out of those is one that's sort of a general philosophy of life for me, I guess, which is to treat people with respect, to be honest with them, but while being honest, always be very careful not to be mean or cruel.
Right. So I don't think I was ever mean or cruel, but I was definitely so business oriented. I wasn't aware of the of the human nature of it and the potential impact when I was younger. And I regret that these days.
I suspect that's true for everyone when they're younger.
Yeah, you could be right.
I know I have mellowed tremendously. I've grown.
Right, yes, I like the idea of mellowing. Yep, my wife would agree that I've mellowed, yes. So, okay, if you got those lessons from some wins, have you had any major struggles or losses that stood out that shaped you as a leader from the other side?
I have. I think some of my most memorable struggles have involved ethics. When I've been in a situation where the company has asked me to do something that I considered to be unethical. Fortunately, that hasn't happened a lot. But I have found that my reaction to that sort of situation is first to try to negotiate. I'll give you an example. I was asked to sign a very restrictive non-compete agreement at a consulting firm, and I was not willing to sign the agreement because to sign it and to, more importantly in my mind, to adhere to the terms of the agreement, I would not have been able to work in the area where I lived for 5 years after leaving the firm.
Okay,
so I was unwilling to put my signature on a contract of that nature. Most of my colleagues, if not all of them, actually did sign the agreement and felt that they could argue that they had signed under duress, et cetera, et cetera. But I did consult an attorney. The attorney said, you never know how that's going to play out. And ethically, I just was not going to sign something that I truly did not agree with. So I spent a year negotiating every Friday with the head of human resources, who would call me and say, you're going to be fired if you don't sign this agreement. And I said, I know, I've enjoyed working with you. We had done projects together. And I said, do what you have to do. They never fired me, which is not totally surprising. But eventually I did leave. And I left with my self-respect intact. And I think I had taken the right position, and I'm glad I stuck to it.
How did you handle emotionally the stress that any Monday somebody could turn around and say, you know what, we do need to fire you?
I think that I probably went through the stages of grieving, but I got to the anger stage quickly enough that being fired was not something that was going to crush me.
Okay, that makes sense.
And I started working my networks, of course.
Yes. Yeah, and the other thing is like sometimes companies do things because they're told to do things, not because they themselves buy into it. At some level, HR realized that they had to drive towards compliance, not that they necessarily had the heart for it, because if they had the heart for it, they would have done something earlier.
Yes.
And the other thing is, at some level, if you're a maverick and you're producing, companies aren't stupid either. They're like, okay, they're a maverick here. What's the cost? And in fact, when I came to this country, we had a guy who was an out-and-out maverick, and he could cause a lot of heat and friction wherever he was. But in a crisis, he was phenomenal. And people used to say that this person earned his salary 2 months of the year, and the other 10, well, he just had special projects, a license to do whatever he needed to do. But his value was so high, it didn't matter that he was a maverick, because you knew that when you needed him, he would pull out all the stops and deliver. So non-compliance isn't always a bad thing.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And the company thought enough of me, apparently, that when I gave notice, they kept me for 6 weeks writing proposals and so on for future work, which I found to be incredibly ironic.
Yes. Of all the kind of proposals you could have been writing, that is one of the most ironic. So we've almost run out of time, and I just want to see if we can pull this together. As you look at your leadership path, and as you look at the wins that you've had and the struggles that you've had, what helped you develop as a leader? Did you have mentors along the way? Did you learn from your current managers you had in place, from books? How did you develop yourself as a leader?
I have always had mentors. I think I had mentors starting in elementary school. They weren't formal mentors. In most cases in school, they were my teachers. but I would always take more advantage of my teachers, I think, than other students would. In college, for example, I would always go to my professor's office hours, which can result in a young student being tutored, possibly individually, by a Nobel laureate or a Pulitzer Prize winner. And I have always been fortunate to have at least one teacher who took great interest in me and who really served as a true mentor. And then, of course, I've had mentors as managers, Jeff Rock being a great example. And I'm also very willing to reach out to people and ask for help and ask their opinion and ask what they think I should do in a particular situation, which, of course, then puts them in the role of mentor for me as well. And the other thing I do is I read voraciously. So we have 1,000 books in our garage waiting to be donated, and we have barely made a dent in the library that we have in our house. So I am simply I have an unquenchable thirst for learning things by reading.
Yeah, I understand the big library thing. My wife and I have moved a lot, and every time we've had to get rid of books, it's like getting rid of old friends. It's very, very hard.
Yes, or children.
Yes. I think more old friends, because I can get rid of my children fairly easily these days. So thank you so much for being on the show. I really did appreciate it. Thank you, Sandy, for showing us, obviously, through wins. But I did like the fact that the loss that you chose was an ethical issue, and it shows that standing up for your ethics, it's never a bad thing, but it's not always a catastrophic thing that people will have you believe around you. People will always run to the worst-case scenario, and you've just shown the worst-case scenario just didn't happen. And then again, your leadership through mentorship, having the ability just to always take the good quality of people that are around you and get the best out of them. And obviously, if you show yourself willing, most people enjoy mentoring. So you've obviously been poured into quite a bit as well. So there's a lot of information there for Impact Nation to unpack and to say, okay, what will I concentrate on in the next 6 months? Because, guys, if we've concentrated on one of the things that Sandy has taught us over the next 6 months, we'll be a lot stronger on our leadership path in 6 months' time than we are today. Sandy, thank you very much for being on the show.
Tony, thank you. It's been a pleasure, and thanks for that great summary.
Thank you. Okay, this is Tony Sherman, your host and guide. Until next week, wishing you a great week.
That's it for this week. Thank you for listening. Now go and apply these few gems. Make the wisdom you have heard your own. If you want to be part of our launch success, then please go to impactteamsradio.com/love and tell the world. If you want more and never want to miss a beat, please go to impactteamsradio.com/subscribe. If you have 3 minutes, we would love to see a positive review on iTunes. And until next time, remember to act on what you've learned, and you'll be ahead of most of the world. Impact Teams Radio.